Today's lesson is about cities and mountains. Get your notebooks ready. You will take a picture and submit these notes. I'm going to begin close to home. A lot of you know about Rip City or Stumptown or the City of Roses or all the different nicknames that make up Portland. Portland is Bridge City. Portland is Stumptown. It is the City of Roses and even has some less savory nicknames. That's a lead-in to our list of cities here. Pause the video and go ahead and write these down and leave space to take some notes. The first three are all the same. Jerusalem and Zion and City of David can be used interchangeably. I'll get more information on the City of David in a minute or two. After Saul loses the kingship, all the tribes come together and decide to choose David as king. They anoint him king, and it says that he was 30 years old when he became king. Interestingly, the Gospels also say that Jesus was 30 years old when he began his public ministry. It says that David ruled for 7 years in Hebron and then ruled in Jerusalem for 33 years. Matter of fact, one of his first tasks as king is to attack the city of Jerusalem, and he makes it his capital. As David is going up against the Jebusites in Jerusalem, they tell him, "You shall not enter here. The blind and the lame will drive you away." Big smack talk. They're up on a mountain. They don't think that David can conquer them. David decides to attack them through the water shaft and is successful and captures their city. This is the fortress of Zion, the City of David. Zion is the mountain on which Jerusalem's built. That's why the Jebusites were so confident that they could keep the city. Jerusalem's also called the City of David because David conquers it and makes it the political capital of his kingdom. His son Solomon later will build a temple and make it the religious capital as well. But Jerusalem, the city of peace, the city of Salam or Salem or Shalom, is also known as Zion and is also known as the City of David. The term Zion is so popular that we even see it in the Psalms. Psalm 126 is about the Israelites coming back after the Babylonian exile. And it says, "When the Lord restored the captives of Zion, we thought we were dreaming." It's a song of ascents. It's a song of pilgrims going up to Jerusalem. Psalm 24 takes the image of Jerusalem or Mount Zion and talks about it being like heaven, just as the Greeks called Olympus their place of heaven where the gods lived. "Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in God's holy place? The clean of hand, the pure of heart, those who have not given their souls to useless things and what is vain." So if you want to go to heaven, if you want to go up the mountain of God, you've got to be a good person. So even the term Zionism in the modern age is used to refer to people in the late 1800s and throughout the 1900s who decided to move back to Palestine. Jews who moved from Russia and from the United States and from all over Europe and even parts of Africa to reestablish a modern political state. They were called the Zionists because they were going back to Zion, going back to Jerusalem. Little sidebar here. I grew up in Southern California near the City of Roses. I even had the opportunity to march in the Rose Parade one year. Those who are from Portland might be surprised to know that Portland's not the only City of Roses. Just as people in Pasadena might be surprised to know that they're not the only City of Roses. Or actually the Crown City, I guess officially. Well, we have the same issue in the Bible. If I go to the New Testament, to Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, Caesar Augustus decides to take account of all the people in the empire and decides to have everybody go to their hometown. And Joseph, Mary's husband, goes up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David that is called Bethlehem. First note, Galilee is below sea level and Judea is up in the hill country. So even though you're going from north to south, you talk about going up to Jerusalem. But the city of David is Bethlehem. And hopefully some of you remember that when David was first chosen as king, when Saul was fired, God told Samuel to fill his horn with oil and go to Jesse of Bethlehem and to choose the new king from among his sons. So Bethlehem is also called the city of David because that's where David's from. So we have two cities of David, and we have multiple names for Jerusalem. My apologies if the Pasadena reference confused you as well. Interestingly, Bethlehem and Jerusalem are actually fairly close to each other. As the crow flies, it's just a few miles from one city of David to the other. But when I was in Jerusalem, I took a cab from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and you actually go to a border crossing because the Palestinian Authority controls Bethlehem and Jerusalem is part of Israel. So Israeli citizens can't travel into Bethlehem, and if you are a tourist, you actually have to cross a small border crossing to get from one place to the other. So even though they're very close to each other, it's a little bit of an ordeal to get from one to the other. There will be a map on the test which is talking about the occupied territory, and I do have some cities here like Nazareth and Hebron and Bethlehem and Jerusalem. But this map, I would like to talk about the mountains. I'm not going to ask you to locate mountains on the map. And when I say mountains, I'm exaggerating a little bit. All of these places are about 2,000 feet in elevation at the most. The only one that's fairly large is Sinai, which is way down on the Sinai Peninsula. And even though it's 7,000 feet in elevation, it's only about 1,000 feet higher than the places around it. But in the Bible, mountains are seen as places where important events take place. And some of these may already be, or hopefully are already familiar to you. Spell this last word correctly. Calvary is C-A-L-V-A-R-Y. That's different than cavalry, which is people on horseback. This is Mount Carmel, where Elijah fights the prophets of Baal. Not going to be on the test. This is Mount Gilboa, where Saul dies. That will not be on the test. And again, the location of these mountains isn't what's important. What I want you to write down is why each place is important. Mount Sinai, also called Mount Horeb, is where Moses first receives his call from God. It's where he brings the Israelites after they escape from slavery. It's also going to be later, we'll talk about this in a future chapter, where Elijah takes refuge when he's being pursued. So Mount Sinai is not on the map, but it's the place of the Great Theophany and the Great Covenant. Mount Nebo we talked about as we left Egypt too. Mount Nebo is in modern-day Jordan. It's the mountain that Moses supposedly climbed up, looked over the Jordan River, and then died. It's also the mountain that MLK Jr. refers to in his mountaintop speech the night before he's assassinated. Mount Tabor we'll come back to in a minute. Mount Zion, we've already talked about, is here. It's in Jerusalem, and this is a mountainous area. There's lots of peaks, there's lots of individual hills and mountains, and two of those hills are right outside of Jerusalem. The Mount of Olives and Mount Calvary are part of Jerusalem. And I'll begin with the Mount of Olives. Going back to the story of David. After he becomes king and has an affair, his family life kind of falls apart. Children are fighting with each other, killing each other, rebelling against David, and David's son Absalom actually rebels against David and attacks Jerusalem. So David actually leaves Jerusalem, except for 10 of his concubines. Interesting side story there. And as he leaves Jerusalem, he stops at the Mount of Olives and watches his whole army go past. While he's there, he weeps without ceasing. All those who were with him also had their heads covered and were weeping as they went. And one of the reasons why David's so upset about his son's rebellion is that David's own friend, Ahithophel, is one of the people helping Absalom. Ahithophel gives Absalom some pretty interesting advice to prove to people that he's the king. Well, as the story goes, Absalom's rebellion collapses, and Absalom himself is killed in battle. After Absalom's rebellion falls apart, Ahithophel, the close friend of David who betrayed him, goes to his home in his own city, leaves orders concerning his household, and hangs himself. And that kind of brings that story to a close. Except, if you are a Christian, this might sound a little bit familiar. Just as David was betrayed by a friend, just as David went to the Mount of Olives and wept, just as the betrayer of David hung himself, Christians will recognize the story of Jesus. That Jesus was betrayed by one of his 12 followers, Judas Iscariot. Jesus went out on the night he was betrayed and wept in the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives. And after Jesus was betrayed, the betrayer went and hung himself, according to Matthew's Gospel. There are actually two different stories of how Judas dies. According to one, after Judas gets paid for betraying Jesus, he throws the money into the temple, and then he goes off and hangs himself. The chief priests take the money and buy a place for it and call it the Field of Blood. There's actually two stories of how Judas Iscariot dies. The second story is in the Acts of the Apostles. Peter is telling the apostles they need to choose a new person to replace Judas. And he tells the story of Judas buying a parcel of land with the wages of his iniquity, the wages of his sin. And while he's there, he falls headlong, bursts open in the middle, and his insides spilled out. And as the story goes, the place was called the Field of Blood. Now, the story of Judas tripping and falling and his guts spilling out doesn't really fit with the story of Judas hanging himself. So scholars scratch their heads and say, one of these stories, at least one of these stories, had to be made up. And the most logical explanation is that the story of Judas hanging himself is the one that's made up, because then it draws a nice parallel between Jesus and David. Just as David was born in Bethlehem, the gospel authors make sure Joseph and Mary get to Bethlehem so that Jesus, who's actually from Nazareth, kind of a little town, not an important place, they want to have Jesus born in Bethlehem. So back up to your list of cities. Nazareth is not the birthplace of Jesus, but Nazareth is where Jesus grows up, and it's where Jesus begins his ministry. And one of the Gospels implies that his parents were originally from Nazareth. The other one implies that they moved there after some problems with the king. So, I think you have everything down except for one place, and that is Mount Tabor. And since we're Portlanders and we live a mile from, or we work a mile from Mount Tabor, I need to point out that we are one of 4 cities in the United States that actually has a volcano in its city limits. The other ones are Honolulu, Hawaii, unsurprisingly, Bend, Oregon, which has Pilot Butte, and someplace in Mississippi. Mount Tabor in Portland takes its name from Mount Tabor in the Bible. According to the story in Judges chapter 4, which you read a while ago, the prophet Deborah, woman religious leader, also a judge, a military leader, called her general Barak. His name means blessed, same root as Barack Obama, whose name is Arabic, related to Hebrew. And she tells Barak to attack Mount Tabor and conquer the enemy General Sisera. Turns out that Barak is not excited about going by himself. He wants Deborah to go with him. And she says, if you won't go by yourself, then it's going to be a woman who gets glory in the battle. And as the story ends up, it is a woman named Jael who kills the enemy general in a horrible way and gets the glory in the battle. So I'll make sure I mention Portland in my note about Mount Tabor. In the New Testament, there is a story of Jesus going up onto a mountaintop and being transfigured and turning snow white and glowing and having Moses and Elijah appear to him. And according to one tradition, Mount Tabor is where that happens, kind of in the neighborhood of Nazareth, but it's not ever listed conclusively. So take a picture of your notes and submit them.